Hi, my name is Gabriela Torres. I am an anthropologist and I work as a professor at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. When we talk about racial justice and policing in the US, we need to talk about asylum. As a society, we need to make good on our ethical and legal commitment to sustain the right to seek asylum. This is a commitment to human rights globally, but it is also a commitment that furthers racial justice in the United States. The right to seek asylum is being undermined today on many fronts. Culturally, there are two related factors that we can point to. The first is the criminalization of migration, and the second is the extension of policing and incarceration to asylum seekers. In essence, we now treat asylum seekers following the same patterns that we use to police and criminalize other communities of color in the United States. And while this approach is not new, it is an approach that is now intensifying in the US with the closing of the southern border, the increased use of detention for asylum seekers, and the legally questionable so-called safe country agreements with asylum-producing countries such as Guatemala. As an anthropologist, I have come to know asylum seekers working as an expert witness on gender-based violence cases for over 10 years. For me, the work of expert witnessing is a natural extension of my research. As a scholar of gender-based violence, I help shed light on the context from which individual persons make a claim for asylum. Much like I do in my classroom, the work of expert witnessing is the work of education for the public good. Even as this work has involved teaching others, it is work where I have learned much about the patterns of racialized injustice in the US. Doing this work, I have come to learn that different aspects of policing and incarceration are central to the lives of many asylum seekers today. Some asylum seekers I work with are tethered to electronic ankle bracelets, for which they pay hundreds of dollars per month, sometimes paying for these for years. The bracelets are issued by bond companies who guarantee the funds so that they might be paroled for detention. When I think about this, I have to remind myself that seeking asylum is not a crime in the United States. For others, getting a release from detention is not possible, even at times when COVID-19 runs rampant in detention centers. And I have seen the impact of detention. I have to admit that I don't actually fully understand the humanity of putting some asylum seekers in detention. And I can tell you why. I have seen women whose trauma is worsened as detention, a form of incarceration, layers on top of the traumatic experiences that drove them to seek asylum in the first place. Sometimes the impact has been so severe that they have lost their ability to speak, robbed of their ability to advocate for themselves through the isolation and deprivation of their freedom. I am really not sure why this has to happen if asylum in the US is not a crime. In the past year, we have effectively closed off the right to seek asylum, claiming that asylum seekers might worsen COVID-19. We have not, however, stopped deporting persons infected with COVID-19 from detention centers. Last month, more than 30% of all Guatemalan COVID-19 cases were actually deportees from the United States. Think about that. We are exporting the pandemic. There are things that you can do to support the right to seek asylum as a means to further racial justice. And I'm going to point out to just three. The first thing is learn more about how the right to seek asylum is being threatened right now. To do this, you might consult recent ACLU litigation. You might look at the work of the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at UC Hastings. You might also look at the work of the Tahirih Justice Center. As you look at their work, you might also consider supporting their work. The second thing that I would suggest is to learn more about asylum seekers and how they are treated. And I'm going to give you 2 reading suggestions. The first book is a book about youth by Lauren Heidbrink. Her book is titled Migrant Youth, Transnational Families and the State. The second book is a book by Shoban McGurk and Adrienne Pine, and it is entitled Asylum for Sale. The third thing I think you can do is to learn about why people seek asylum. One quick source is a report written by the United Nations Refugee Agency, or UNHCR. It is entitled Women on the Run. You might also, if you're a student, consider taking a Latin American Studies class to understand the United States' role in Latin America, in particular, as many asylum seekers are now coming from this region. And if you're an academic, I'm going to suggest a 4th thing that you can do. If you're an academic with pertinent expertise, consider serving as an expert witness. And if you're interested in how this works, you might want to read Leila Rodriguez's new book called Culture as Judicial Evidence. Thank you.